Welcome everybody to another edition of Yoga Therapist. Where am I now? We're with Drew Sheinen. He is from the kind of Philadelphia area outside of Valley Forge. And Drew has been a yoga therapist for a number of years. And in each one of these, I keep it quiet and I like to turn it over to the person to kind of go through their journey. So Drew will talk a little bit about how he got involved in yoga, into teachers training, yoga therapy, and what he's doing now. So Drew, how did you get into yoga?
Thanks for having me, Bob. So about 20 years ago now, I was going through a really difficult time with severe anxiety, even being afraid to leave the house. And I was looking for anything that would give me even 5 minutes of relief. And I happened to find this yoga DVD and said, well, you know what? I don't have to leave my home, which was a big deal at that point. And let me just see what this does. So I started, well, now what I know is asana, some of the breathing, and I started to notice a difference in, for a few hours that the anxiety would lessen. And so I did that at home for a while. And that would really kind of began and kicked off my yoga practice, was really to just help with anxiety, which is a big piece I like to focus on with people in my practice.
Interesting. And then you started classes at a fitness club, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the home practice, I went to a local gym and I happened to start working with a personal trainer in addition to the yoga classes I was taking. And that personal trainer had actually also graduated from YogaLife.
Okay.
And he said, well, you might be interested more in, in learning about yoga. And that's what led me to start my original teacher training at YogaLife,
Our
several
good
years ago.
friend, that was with Keith, our good friend.
That was the key. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, great. And um, so this helped. What aspects of that early yoga helped with your anxiety specifically then once you were going to classes?
Now, I think if I look back on it now, it was really the quieting of the mind. There was not much I could figure out what to do to really bring some type of diversion from the racing thoughts. Sometimes I may call a friend or may do something else, but I didn't have a way that I could actually do it on my own. And
Mm,
when the breathing and asana started to help me to do that, I realized that, hey, there was something more here that I just was not really understanding the capabilities. So that's, I
nice.
think, really what brought it to me and said, I've got to learn more.
So did you go from that point, you wanted to go further and do yoga teachers training at that stage?
Absolutely. So I said, I want to just learn more. I didn't know if I wanted to be a teacher at that point, but I knew I wanted to go somewhere that could teach me more about yoga than what I was learning at a typical gym. And I
Mm.
happen to live close to YogaLife, heard great things about it. And now, several years later, we're doing this discussion, which is great.
So what would be a highlight? Because the teachers training at that time was a year long and it was definitely had a strong personal growth component as well as the teaching. So how was that segment for you?
It was great because I got to really be exposed to teachers I felt that really focused more on the holistic aspect of yoga versus the physical movement part of yoga, which I feel like most, I don't want to say most because I don't want to stereotype, but to a degree, I think I find that in a lot of places I've taken classes outside of a yoga studio or even at some yoga studios. So I think that was number one. What's important is getting grounded in the types of classes that yoga could be,
Mm,
especially as now that I am still teaching. I think the second thing was the seminars I could go to really help me with the diversity of the topics, the way that yoga could be brought into any aspect of life was also a really huge, I would say, learning piece for me because I didn't realize how widespread yoga could actually be in every facet of somebody's life. And the yoga teacher training helped me to do that. And actually, to a degree, that's what inspired me to be able to want to go to the yoga therapy training because I want to figure out how to bring the knowledge I was gaining to people, especially on an individual level versus in a group setting.
hmm. So how about a short explanation? So when you say bring the yoga into your life, you don't mean you were at work doing twisting poses in your chair. So how for you did that kind of connect?
Yeah. So if I give an example, the first one that comes to mind that I learned then was about karma yoga. And, working in a corporate career like I have for about 30 years, I never was able to figure out how to bring some of the pieces related to passion, joy, gratitude, and also not only just in myself, but how to bring it as a leader is how to bring some of the pieces is really I would say the centering of what you bring to your overall life versus, focusing on the results and the numbers, and that's about it. So if I really approach it as an individual and gave space to those people, listened, and there was a lot of listening, training that I got in education out of the Yoga Life programs. The karma yoga piece and looking how I approached work completely changed who I think I was and my stress level at work. And it also changed, frankly, people used to say to me, well, you're very different than a lot of other managers. And I took that actually as a compliment, but that's because when I explained to them what type of work I was bringing to each day and how the yoga came in, they said, well, that's a really kind of interesting way to look at it. We don't hear that very often. And it's some personal relationships I still have today with the people who worked on my teams. I think part of that, frankly, came from bringing karma yoga to work.
And everybody, if you don't know this term, he's using karma yoga. It's the yoga of action. And then generally it's not just your job, but it's like having a certain attitude at a job or even at chores at home. So it sounds like the teacher's training and the yoga therapy kind of blended together to some degree.
It did, because I literally went from right to the other. So I graduated from teacher training and then I started right away. So there was, almost like a continual educational evolution for me because I went, really for 3 to 4 years straight, really immersing myself in, both yoga teacher training and yoga therapy training, which really, I think, cemented what I'm able to do with yoga today.
So did that, how did your anxiety fare? Did it start to just, what happened to the anxiety after all of that? Because I'm sure you did counseling and other things.
Yeah, so I've done counseling, several times over my life, and there are, just on some of the underlying conditions I have, there are certain medications that I still take, but I was able to reduce some of those medications. And I'd say the panic attacks I would have, they're pretty much non-existent now. I'm able to use the yoga if I even feel one coming on. I use my breath techniques, even just putting my hands on my belly, or even just notice. I always say, notice the depth of your breath, notice the pace of your breath. And I use those two words. And if I feel the pace up, or if I feel the depth only maybe going like right here, for example, it's a telltale sign that something's going to happen. So the breathing techniques have really been able to help me even prevent any of the anxiety, I would say episodes from even beginning.
And is there a mental side of the yoga that help with the anxiety or some sort of insights that occurs psychologically?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to one sentence I heard all the time, and I use it, I would say like religiously. You can control your reaction, but not the action of others. And that was a huge piece for me because I realized a lot of what was happening was reactions to things that I wasn't even aware of the level of reaction I was having. So now I take a lot of time to, in a mindful way to look is what's my reaction? And if it's different than what I expect, I'll look afterward and say is, well, what was behind that? How does that potentially change? So for me, that one sentence almost serves as a bellwether and a beacon for how I actually use the
Wow,
mental part of my practice.
nice. That's beautiful. Yeah, congratulations.
Thanks.
A lot of work goes into facing these sorts of things for everybody. So then I know you're teaching at the local YMCA
Yep.
now.
So I've been teaching, I'm lucky I had the opportunity to teach YogaLife for a while. That was my first teaching piece, which is great. And then I taught online during the pandemic for about a year for an organization. 3 of us were doing charitable work. And we're donating all our yoga proceeds to different charities of choice. And then about a little over a year and a half ago, I started, teaching at my local Y, teach a few classes a week. But I've also done seminars there on specific topics as well, which has been great.
Wow.
So I'm really happy that, a few years later, I'm still doing teaching And then the yoga therapy kind of goes with that. We'll talk about that in a
What
bit.
what type of seminars do you do?
So I've done a couple related to yoga therapy or yoga and aging. Um, I did a second seminar on yoga and work
Mm,
stress because karma yoga was the first limb I associated with. There are other
mm,
words I think, other passive yoga that I've gotten more in tune with as my practices continued to evolve. But karma yoga was the one that resonated with me first. So I kind of you go to that for some seminars at times. So yoga for
nice.
work-life balance is what I called it.
Yoga for work-life balance. Very nice. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, everybody, when they do yoga therapy training, they will learn how to give seminars too as part of it. And that's great that you follow through. And then you see different clients. Obviously, we won't talk about the client, but what is that like for you?
It's great because you get to really learn on a different level what those individuals need. You can stop in the middle to see what's really going on, what's resonating with them, may not be resonating with them. Whereas in class-based style, you can come in with a theme or you can come in with trying to set the intention, or maybe I would say the energy of the room to an extent. Um, but in a one-on-one, you can really get to know that individual and I think put different uses of yoga in play for what they're using and what they want to be able to learn. So I always think about the terminology I learned in my education called the toolbox. And I'll try and really say, here's the toolbox. What am I hearing this person say based on what I'm interpreting? And what can I pull out of the toolbox?
Nice, nice. That's great. Um, yeah. So then I know everybody, Drew also has a third tier of things that you're working. So tell me about the International Association of Yoga Therapists, the certifying board, and your role there.
Yeah, so if I kind of go on, since there was a great explanation of karma yoga, one of the ways I thought I could do with karma yoga is join what's called the International Association of Yoga Therapists, or IAYT, their accreditation committee. And what that committee basically does is it takes in all the applications for either new programs around the world or existing programs that are going for reaccreditation to make sure that the standards across those various programs are met as different yoga therapy students get their education. Um, I actually last year took on the role of the vice chair of that committee. So I want to take even more of a leadership role with that. So that's given me a lot of great opportunity to see not only what just happens in the US, but what happens around the world and how other programs are built. And I've actually gotten a lot of my own additional education about yoga and yoga therapy from what I get to see other programs doing. So
Mm.
that's my third tier.
And how many years have you been with the IOYT?
I think I started, it was October 22. So it'll be just about a year and a half.
Gotcha. And what would be some cool things you've learned? Like, what is the international? What are the differences with the international places outside of the United States?
Yeah, so what I'm able to learn, I actually there are two examples, Bob, that come to mind for me. Is one I got to see there's a lot of folks that are on from Canada, and I've gotten to see how they've been able to integrate some pieces into the medical community in
Mm,
Canada, which wouldn't necessarily with the way that the US healthcare
mm,
system, for those folks that don't obviously know me, I work in the US healthcare system and have for 30 years. So I get to see what they've been able to do and integrate it more holistically than what we have the opportunity, at least in today's structure in the US. I also got to see some work in Israel around post-war PTSD for Israeli
mm,
troops, because every resident of Israel needs to go into the army. It's a law if you're a resident. And being able to see how they brought yoga therapy to treat troops after they've been in service and how
cool.
those programs center around that, it was really, I thought, incredibly fascinating. So those
Hmm.
are ways to be able to see it go into real life practice that I may
Is
not be able to see otherwise.
Yeah, is that similar to what we would do with the kind of first responder work that we do sometimes?
It would be very similar to that. Or
Mm,
it could be if we think about it, from the pandemic, how yoga therapists have worked with healthcare workers or other different
mm,
people that may fall now under this first responder category. That'd
yeah.
be one way that might be a correlate, or excuse me, a correlation or parallel related to that. Absolutely.
So maybe we do one interesting example here and see what you would share with us. So when somebody is a first responder, they see basically a tragic situation happening. Like you said, from a nurse in a COVID wing watching people die, but on a regular basis. So it's very different than for those of us who are not in that kind of responder role where we don't see a car accident every 3 days. We see one once every 5 years and we drive by it or it happens to us or something. But these people are seeing them on the daily. So what would you say are the keys of how yoga therapy helps them cope with that?
Yeah, if I take it back to some of the basic education that I got is that if I go to the nervous system is kind of where my brain goes with that is there are different facets of the nervous system, and depending upon what our exposure is, our nervous system may be just on that fight or flight mode, or
Mm,
nervous system may be more in what we call that resting mode, or maybe like a sympathetic mode. And so when I think of the healthcare workers, when they're coming into the emergency room day in and day out, that level of stress and the environment they're in, their nervous system's going all the time. And the
mm,
question is, how do you start to calm that down? Because a
mm,
lot of times those folks aren't given the tools to figure out how to be able to
right.
work on their own individual reactions that they're seeing because they don't know that their nervous system is maybe just running and running and running. So that's an example to me where some of those pieces can come in where yoga therapy can help by bringing in the aspects of the breath, the mind and the movement all as one to be able to start to bring down kind of the nervous system reaction.
So are you saying that I understand why somebody in a like an emergency situation, you go into kind of a hyperdrive. So are you then seeing that the first responder person, that hyperdrive when they go home is still like running? Is that
So if you
right?
think about it, for those that are sports fans, if you go to a game and you go to a really intense game and that team wins, you don't shut that off 2 minutes later after you leave. You start to really kind of revel in what you saw. Those folks, even if they're, even in an inpatient unit at the hospital, in a medical surgical unit, may not be life or death situations like in the emergency room, but those folks are, have so much going on, especially with the short staffing in hospitals now, that by the time they get home, they're thinking, did I, make sure that I
Mm,
wrote the chart out correctly? What if I didn't do this? And there's a lot of what ifs and questions with it. And so by the time they get home, they can't just an hour later all of a sudden say, I'm going to go to bed now. Um, there
mm,
guys has to be some transition between that work
mm,
time and then downtime. And sometimes
mm,
it's very hard for first responders to find that specific transition from I'm on till I'm now going to be off for a while. And I think
mm.
yoga therapy can do a lot to help with that.
Yeah, definitely. And then of course when you're able to personalize it, you can find what works for a particular individual, which may vary slightly from person to person. And
Absolutely.
have you found also some of like the psychological tools, the different ways of looking at things to be beneficial as well?
There's no question about it. I recently, obviously anonymously worked with a client who's going through stage 4 cancer and was going to have and recently had a surgery related to it. And the goal of that individual was to figure out, based on her attitude, how she could move and how she could breathe after her surgery in an abdominal area, which is going to have sensitivity. But what actually made the visits that we've had so far and the time together, kind of go with your psychological pieces. She came in with an optimistic attitude and wanted to figure out how to do things better to help for self improvement.
Mm,
Um, those folks who come in who may not, be as invested, realize that you really going through a yoga therapy path, there's a lot of self work that need to be done, not somebody doing it for you. That psychological attitude and what you bring to the work is what you're going to get in return. And I
mm,
definitely see different in the clients that I've seen, post, graduation with those who come with one attitude versus coming in with another, how their
mm,
psychological mindset changes their results in their yoga therapy
So
journeys.
in that case, with a person with a stage 4 cancer, would the say the baseline average person without any of this support, would they be having fear as their kind of mindset or something?
I
Obviously, like I would be
Either
afraid.
fear, maybe depression,
Mm,
um, or
helplessness.
in some cases apathy. Um,
Mm,
so I'd say either they've kind of turned off or they're keyed up or very turned on.
mm,
Um, but then in some people, you get an individual like the one I have who just was focused on, I'm going to do better and I'm going
right.
to continue to look for avenues to help me to do that. And yoga therapy was one of the avenues that this person chose.
Nice.
So yeah, you definitely see a variety, but you can get all types of emotions when you come in different sessions with the same client. You get one emotion one day and a very different psychological state the next time that person comes in. And that's part of what really kind of brings interest to being a yoga therapist. You get to see the people where they're at. You just have to
Mm,
know and recognize what you see.
nice. Well, that's all really interesting how if we started the conversation where it's kind of easy sitting here to watch, like you had this anxiety issue a long time ago and then you basically resolved it and now you're helping all these other people, which is pretty cool. um that's great. Would you like to share any last thoughts before we start to wrap it up, or?
Yeah. So the one actually came out of what you just said that I thought was interesting is, I always like to go with people say, well, how do you approach your practice? And I say it by 4 words. Um, Guide, I don't prescribe. Um, so I think that's kind of been the way that I've approached it is, people really go and take what they can get out of the session. And it's not for me to tell them what they get. It's for me to provide the opportunity and the
Mhm.
availability for them to take away what's best. I don't know what that is, but hopefully they can figure it out through the sessions. So that if everybody's looking for what's a place to center, my centering is guide. I don't prescribe.
Nice. You've got some really good sayings. Yeah, I guide, I don't prescribe. Awesome. Well, I think in wrapping up, obviously thanking you, and I think what I'd want to thank you for is how much work you've done, over your life. It's great to see, and congratulations, and may you keep going on.
Absolutely. Thanks for the time. I can't thank Yoga Life enough for what I've been able to get out of not only where I'm going professionally, but personally. I don't think I expected that journey to happen. So to have that
Mm,
kind of recognized here, um,
mhm.
that's really powerful. So thank you, Bob.
Yeah.